Back again. Morning, everyone. My voice seems to have got even worse. The more I try and rectify it, the worse it seems to be. So I think this is what we're stuck with today. I do apologise. So, corners. These are the things that we need, and these are what we need to look at. So let's just pop this up. So thank you for joining me for that little chat just now. We've had lots of questions, and people have been sewing their thread catchers, and they're saying that they're having problems perfecting, let me just show you this one, perfecting their corners, pots corners. Now I must say, when I made this bag to sell. So I did take a lot of time making sure that it was right, and I did unpick it, and I did do it again. I don't think that these sides are completely even, although it is perfectly lined up in the centre. So I'm going to show you how I try and perfect my corners. Okay, so let's just pop this back down. So one of the things that used to frustrate me when I was sewing bags is I didn't get my seams lined up. I didn't get, everything wasn't even. When I tried to insert a lining into a bag, it wouldn't match up. And when I bought myself a mat, now you don't need a big mat like this. These are quite expensive. You can buy the 8x6s. I did watch an amazing tutorial the other day. And what a lady did, it was American, so she was talking about Target and the dollar store, which I assume are the same as our pound shops. So she went and bought for £1 each, sorry. She bought 9 of these mats, and they were 8x6. And she also bought some of their duct tape. Now, we have duct tape in the garage, and it's really strong. I have no idea if there is duct tape in the pound shop. Morning, Deb, whether you would be able to use that, whether it'd be strong enough. But she turned the mats over, she stuck all of them together, and she ended up with a mat bigger than this. So she did try and glue them. She said it didn't work. Duct tape was the best option. So there is that option for you. Like I said, I haven't done it, so I don't know. Maybe if somebody wants to try it, if that's the way that you want to get your mat, then as I said, they can be quite expensive. But I do feel you do need maybe a 10x10, if that's the size that they do, because you need to be able to go off your fabric. So what I do, if I'm measuring, so if you see I've got a 10 here and a 10 here, and then what you do is you lay your ruler across and then you cut, and you know that that is from 10 to 10 inches, or it has centimetres on the back. That will make all the difference, rather than knowing that that's 10 and that's 10, and then I'm going to draw a line, I'm going to cut, and I might go off slightly. Definitely a ruler and a mat and a rotary cutter really has changed the way that I sew, because it's just made everything more accurate. Now, I deliberately, when I cut this out this morning, so what I do is I place my fabric onto my mat. You could consider this wasteful, but this is a big duvet cover, okay? So I knew what size I kind of wanted, so I did get the rotary cutter, and I thought, well, that's about, and then I sort of took some off. So I do have some pieces that you may call wasteful, but what I do is I put them in my little bag, and then I keep them ready to do my free motion, because no piece of fabric is too small, okay? So I got the basic size, and then I placed my fabric into my, let me see, we'll do it this side. Oh no, that is the right side. Into the corner. I do it this way around because this way around is straight. So I placed it into the corner, and obviously it wasn't straight. So all I did is I lined up my bees. If you've got a pattern on your fabric, it can make it more difficult, because sometimes if you've got stretch in this, my bees will be off. So if I tried to take it from the bee's wing to the wing to the wing, that might be slightly off. So you may have to sacrifice your alignment of your pattern, just because the cotton, you know, where it's stretched, where it's moved. Well, we can get onto stretch fabrics another time, but we're talking about cotton now. But even with cotton, as you can see, this bee is slightly over more over than that one. Okay, so if you've got a pattern that's a repeat, you could have problems anyway. So this is perfectly straight, but you will see that going against this line, it isn't perfectly straight. Now before, I would have gone, that's okay, but it really isn't. Measuring is very, very important. So I'm going to cut this again. Okay, so what you do, I'm going to lift that up. So this is the 12. So I've got a definite line on the 12, and then on the 12.5, you usually get a dotted line. Okay, so even if I'm going to lose some of my fabric, so I know there is the 12 here, okay, and there is the 12 at the bottom, and I'm going to line them both up. Now another problem is with this being quite long. Okay, you'll start at this end, and then by the time you get, morning Carol, by the time you get to the top, you'll have lost some of your pressure and it may wiggle. Okay, so the idea is that I need to do this standing up. So you hold and put all your pressure on this end. Okay, open up your rotary cutter. Now I don't lock it open, I just keep it so I can keep moving it, because you really do need to be safe with these things. See, that's even moved slightly there. So I'm starting here. Now I'm going slowly but firmly, but if I then carry on at the top, I am not putting all that pressure on the top. So I'm just walking my fingers up, keeping as firm as I can, and that's moved slightly. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the top. Okay, and when I pull that away, that has stayed on the 12 all the way up. Now that, keeping it that accurate, it does take the time. I know my gran, when she sewed, my nan, sorry, when she was sewing, she didn't have a rotary cutter, and she made amazing things. All I can tell you is what I've done to make my sewing more accurate. Okay, now I'm going to line up these two, making sure. Now even if it's slightly off and you think, nah, it'll be okay, it won't be. Okay, you need to make sure that is perfect. So this one is on the 16.5. Now, I'm probably not going to use this tote bag, okay? I'll be gifting it to someone, so I still want it to be correct. So, again, no, you need to stand up. See, it's moved. So maybe that's another tip. I mean, I always do it standing up anyway, so it's just something that I do. So maybe you need that for all the pressure. So now, this is measuring 12 inches by 16.5 inches, but all of those corners are perfect. Okay, they are all lined up, and that will help when you're sewing. I've just noticed, because I've cut it down so far, we're going to have quite a thin tote bag. So actually, I'm going to measure again. I'm going to take some off. Now I want to have a few of my bees on. So what I do is I will then move this up, because I don't need to know the width of it, okay? I just need to straighten it. So I'm going to move it up so I can see both sides, okay? Should I move that? No, it's this way, isn't it? So I think it's really important that you see all of this. Just see a few names. Morning Sally, morning Yvonne. So I'm going to push that up, making sure that it's dead straight, and then I'm just going to decide what size. Now obviously if you're following a pattern, you would know what size. We're going to need some of our seam. So our seam's going to be 1 centimetre, and then once we've boxed our corner, we're going to need to add this extra bit, because the box corner takes up that much of the fabric, and I think that's probably a nice size for a tote bag. So I'm going to add those few inches for our corners. Again, if you're following a pattern, you won't need to do this, because you will just be cutting to what the pattern says. But when you're freestyling, like I am, you can cut it to any size. Now, box corners. This is a box corner, okay? But what you have to remember when you're measuring your box corner, if it isn't in your pattern, is how much fabric you're going to need. As I said, adding onto the tote bag. And when you're cutting out your corners, because that's the way we're going to do it today, you need to know how much you're going to lose, because you'll have your seam allowance. So I usually use 1 centimetre. You're going to lose your seam allowance when you're folding it. But also once you have taken your corner, you're then coming in another centimetre the way that you've sewn it. Okay, now that will become clear once we've started measuring. Okay, so I'll have to keep it this way. So you're looking at my bees. I've used white fabric. Okay, I apologise to the person that does receive this because I'm going to be sewing with black to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so we do need the measurements now. So this is now 14 by 12. Okay, so we need to think about how much we're going to be cutting out. So if I did, so I'm going to draw from my 13 mark. There we go. So I'm just going to draw a square. Okay. I'm not going to draw the one on that side because I will use the cutout to measure it. So I've gone 13 there, so that's 2 inches. So I'm going to draw 2 inches here, okay? But what I have to remember is, once I've sewn my seam, okay, so if you take out this box corner, that is not how big your box corner is going to be, because you're going to sew a seam. So I'm going to use half an inch here because it's going to be easier for you to see, whereas I said normally I do a centimetre. So this piece of fabric will not be part of my corner because that piece of fabric is going to be in my seam. Okay? And then the same on this side. This part of that box corner is not going to be, you're going to repeat myself, because that is going to be my seam too. So suddenly your box corner, when you sew across your triangle, it is no longer 2 inches, she says. Actually it is, because obviously it's the width. So it is 2 2/8 of an inch, okay? So, but I want it to be bigger than that, because when I'm putting my box in, I want more of a, so this one, if you look, is much bigger, okay? So I'm going to have to make my box bigger. So I'm going to go down to the 12, okay? No, maybe the 13.5. Because that size that I drew, I would like it to be that size, okay? So, and then coming out to this other, but you can see, if I was doing this just on, you know, my countertop is white, if I was just doing this on my counter without this mat, it would be so hard to be measuring, because I'd be doing it like this. I'd be measuring, so it's 2.5 and then 2.5, and then I'd be doing all of that. It does make it much harder, but having this mat really does make a difference, and having the see-through ruler as well. Now I got, this is from Amazon. I can tell you it's Anzio, but I know there are other makes out there that are cheaper. But this is my So Easy ruler, and this is my So Easy rotary cutter, and I bought them a long time ago, but I bought them together in a deal at Hobbycraft. So I do believe that they have that deal on quite often. So hopefully, you know, if that's what you need to get your corners more accurate, then you will be able to purchase them. So I'm going to take this corner out. So this is another way. I'm going to stand up. You can use your rotary cutter. So I'm placing it on the edge, okay, and then moving it out. So you can see I started in the centre, just there, and then cut straight. Now giving myself a harder corner to cut. Okay, so as I said, make sure that's smooth. Start in the corner, push down and out. Now I have a little bit left, so all you do is you just pop this in and it will just take out those last pieces for you. Okay, so now I'm going to take this over to the other side rather than measuring, because I want the corners to be exactly the same. Okay, so now I am going to pin it, and I am going to show you that you can do it with scissors. This is a smaller cut, obviously, so it is easier, but you do need a very sharp pair of scissors. and we'll see if it makes a difference, okay? So you can see I am making sure that these corners are exactly the same, okay? There we go. So when I have finished this bag, as I said, I haven't really thought about the measurements. So my seam, I haven't drawn that one in. Let's turn it that way, because on this ruler I do have other measurements. So this is 1 inch across here, half an inch, sorry. There you go. So there, I could draw in my other seam. Okay, so when this is sewn, we'll put the 2 corners together and then we'll measure and show you how big it's actually going to be. Okay, so we now have our T section. So I'm going to go and bring in the machine, but I am going to do this basic sew that I promised somebody. Okay, so I'm using black thread, as I've said. I have drawn on my seam lines, so hopefully you can see them, and then I'm hoping that this is going to help everybody that is literally joining us as a newbie, as we were discussing. So I'm going to bring on the machine, and I'm going to try and use an angle where you can see behind my machine. Okay, so turn that around. There we go. I'm going to bring in my machine so you can see what I am sewing. Okay, this is a very strange angle to be sewing at. So, what the person lady asked for, so you threaded your machine, okay, and you now need to sew your very first stitch. Now, straight lines are the best stitches to start with, okay? And I have my machine on my first stitch, so turn my machine off, okay? I haven't touched the tension, I haven't done anything. Turn my machine on, and that is how I'm going to stick with it, okay? I'm not going to change any of the dials. I'm just sticking with the first stitch, its default setting, okay? Now, as you saw, I've drawn on my seam, okay? I'm going to pop this underneath the machine. Now, I don't know what feet that you're going to be using. I don't know what sewing foot you're going to be using. But this is the one that I use, okay? So this is called my F foot. Now, usually, with a Janome, you get your A foot. And that is the one that you would sew with because it's the first one. And this one is meant for quilting and darning and where you need to see where you sew from. But I lost my A foot and I have used this foot for years, okay? If you can find a clear foot for your machine, or if your machine does come with it, I highly recommend you using it. As far as I know, the only difference is the fact that it's see-through, okay? I don't think it makes any other difference. It's just see-through. So what you do, if you haven't changed, I hope you guys can see, if you haven't changed your foot on your machine before, what you do, so turn your machine off, okay? I'm going to put this one back on because I'm assuming when you get your machines, this is really hard to do. I'm assuming when you get your machines, you have a foot on it, okay? So what I've done is I lift up my presser foot, okay? I push the button down and then my foot comes off. I think that's the same with many of the modern plug-in machines, electric machines, okay? So there is a little bar on here and there is a little a gap on there. So that's what my clear foot is for, thanks. That's okay, Karen. I mean, as I said last week, I don't actually have it next to me. I've tried to sew with it next to me. If you look in your sewing manual, it makes all the difference because it has all this information in there. It isn't just troubleshooting and what happens when it's wrong. It's a really good idea to look through your sewing manual if you have one. If you don't have one, go online. There are so many online now, even for some of the older machines that I've been researching for people. to find out if they can do any of the classes that we offer, because I've needed to know what machine they use. So there are many online, okay? So if you don't have it, have a look. But it really is a good read. You know, make yourself a hot drink or a nice cold one and sit and read through your manual. And you may be surprised. I mean, maybe you read through your manual when you first started and you haven't gone back to it. That's what I did. I put it away and then I didn't look at it again. But I have taken it out over the last few months because trying to teach other people to use their machines, I figured, well, I need to know everything that mine does. So what I do, okay, is I place that little bar underneath, put the foot down, and then it just picks it up, okay? So now, this is now joined to my machine. Now your thread, okay, once you've threaded it, it needs to go, many feet have a little gap, so it needs to go through that gap, okay, and out the other side. And I'm just realising I took my foot off again because I have a manual machine. What would be a basic stitch, Dawn? Literally, it is the stitch that when you start to sew, it is what your machine is set at. So mine is just a straight stitch. And to be honest, I haven't used a manual machine, Karen. If you can send me your machine, you know, what number it is, what make it is, and I'll have a look at for you. But what you need is a straight stitch. You need the stitch though. So on my Singer, okay, I've got an old Singer. It doesn't have any other stitches, okay? I think I can change my feet, but that's it. It just has a straight stitch. So it's the most basic stitch. It's the first stitch that you would use. So when we do top stitching, we make our stitch length a little bit longer, but you just need to have the first stitch that you would use just to sew a straight stitch. If that doesn't help, Karen, then I do apologise. But as I've said, if you would like to send me the make and model of your machine, I will look it up for you, and then, you know, we can have a conversation on the Dawn's Tailor Made via Messenger. So I will try and help everyone. As you know, what I know, I will tell you, and what I don't know, I will look up. Okay, so hopefully that helps. The other thing about this foot, Karen, you said you've got a clear one. There is, now I'm hoping you can see, there is a little arrow, okay? Well, it's a triangle, but I call it an arrow, right in the centre here. And that tells me that when my sewing needle is just at its first default setting, that is where it's going to come down. Okay, now if I wiggle it and I make it bigger or smaller or longer or shorter, my stitch, then my needle moves to the left or to the right, but it stays in that gap. My pleasure, Karen. I hope that has helped. But right here, I'm trying to do it so you can, I know if I go too close, all it does is go blurred. But there is a tiny triangle at the bottom. So when I pop this on, okay, turn my machine on, the light comes on and I can see that my needle, when I pop so I'm going to turn it with my handle, when my needle goes down, it is directly in line with that little triangle there. So wherever if I keep my seam line here, right in line with that little triangle, okay, then I know that seam is going to be straight. And if you can draw on your seam, I mean, if I turn this, I mean, it's going to show because I'm using black, but if I open that out, if I sew exactly on that drawn line, you're not going to see it. Okay, so, you know, I'm using white fabric. I said I'm going to use black thread so you can see, but you wouldn't then see that line. Once you open that seam out, if you were using white, this line would be hidden. It's not within your seam allowance, it's exactly on your seam allowance, okay? So the next thing to do, so I'm going to turn this around so you can see the other side. There's going to be a bit of switching today, but like I said, somebody has asked for this tutorial, so I'm more than happy to oblige. So popping my fabric under, where do you put your fabric? Putting my needle back up. Now, if I place my fabric in line with my sewing foot there, okay, where my little triangle is, where my needle is going to be, is not where my line, can you see? Don't know if that's, I mean, you can see the line there, but that is not where I'm going to be sewing. Okay, it would go in the centre of that. If I move my needle over, I'm lucky to have quite a few stitches. So if I go to my second stitch on my machine, my needle would then come down and I would be sewing on that line, okay? So what I would need to do is either, if I have the ability to move my needle over, and I would then sew on that line, or I'm going to go back to my default, so turn my machine off and turn it on again, okay? So now it's gone back to where it started. What I would need to do is line my seam, so where I've drawn this seam line, I would line that up with that triangle, put my foot down, put my needle down, and my needle will go straight through where that line is drawn, okay? So that is how I would get my exact seam. The tricky thing then is to follow that line, because if you're staring here, you can wobble, you can go off, okay? So I have a piece of tape, you can hear it here. I have a piece of sellotape that I put there 12 years ago, okay? It's been there a long time. When I did one of my classes, I think it was with Deb, I attached some washi tape. So washi tape is very pretty colourful sellotape, basically. It's very similar to what you use for insulating tape, but it's not as adhesive as that. So you could use masking tape, it could be the same. You could take a pen and you could draw on it. It's entirely up to you, it's your machine, you do what you wanted to do. So if I put this down now, my piece of fabric is now in line with this piece of tape. So all I would have to do is make sure that this outside of this fabric was touching against that line, and then if I was sewing, that would stay all the way down and I would have the correct seam, okay? But if you go slowly for your first, first couple of sews, if you go slowly, see now that didn't knot, so I'm just going to pull that out. If you go very, very slowly, then, you're going to keep your seam straight anyway. So I'm hoping that is enough detail as was asked for, okay? So as I've said, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to move my stitch over, which is what I normally do because it makes it easier for me, because then I don't have to worry about watching it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line up, as I said, with that triangle in the centre of my foot, or what you need to do is just line up with your needle where your needle is, okay? Now, I'm not going to start sewing from here. I'm going to start sewing from here, okay? If you don't have a back stitch, then don't worry. Just make sure that when you're sewing something, this is just until you get used to doing things, okay? Because then once you've done a few things, then you would know. But what you need to do is start here and then back stitch, okay? Because if you start at the front, I'm not going to show you, but what will happen is this can disappear inside your machine, and then you've got to do things like taking your plate off, okay? So what you do is you put your needle down a little bit further. So what I've done is I've lined the back of my fabric up with the foot there, okay? Now I've got this on the slowest one. If you're using a foot pedal, morning Margaret, if you're using a foot pedal, I need to get mine out and then sew with it because it's been so long, but I don't use my foot pedal, I use my start-stop button. But it means that I have a dial on my machine and I can go fast and I can go slow. But just slow as slowly as you're happy with, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do, I have a needle down on my machine, okay? So I'm going to press my button and my needle goes down. Pull your fabric, your cotton out to make sure it's smooth, okay? Now I'm going to sew. So I'm going to backstitch, which if you have this ability, then you can do that. But what I did read the other day, I'll just show you this, is what somebody did is they lifted up their foot. I think they did it when they did their first stitch. So I'll do it on this seam actually, and then we can do the backstitch on there. Now I've not done this before, what I've done is watch it, okay? So I'm just gonna test this theory with you. Okay, so I'm gonna sew forwards on that line, and then I'm going to wait for my thread to come out the other end. I'm going to stop. And I read this comment and I thought, wow, I didn't know that some people needed to do that, okay? So I have a sewing machine needle, pin, I hope you can see this. So I'm pulling out, gosh, I hope this works. I am pulling up, trying to pull up my thread. Okay, now what's happened now, I don't know if you can see it, there is a little tiny loop here, okay? So if I make it bigger, you will be able to see it. Can you see that loop now? So all I've done is pulled up the top thread and it's actually pulled up the bottom thread, okay? So what they did, they then pulled that out. Okay, so now both of my threads are on the top, okay? Now if somebody is, I just wish my Nan was here and I go, Nan, why do people do this? What's it for? I know we have Google, but it's nice to ask a seamstress, okay? So they then, now I only read this, I didn't see what they did. They then tied a knot. Now maybe this is what you do on Singers, maybe this is what you do on the old machines. I apologise, I only know Singer because, you know, you see people, they have these lovely trestle tables with their Singers. So I'm now tying a knot. Now, hopefully that's useful to somebody. This is now, okay, knotted. So this seam here is not going to come undone, okay, because there is a knot now. Now, if I backstitched one stitch, that would then create a knot too. But what you have to remember is, because you haven't started at the top, okay, if your pattern is measuring from here all the way down, you would have to do this much further back. Okay, now you have a seam allowance usually, but you have a seam allowance everywhere. So I would imagine on your pattern, this would be your seam allowance for the top, okay? So as long as you started within that, I hope that makes sense, then it would be okay. So I've never done that before. I'm now going to snip it off because we've made a knot. There you go. So see, 20 plus, however many years I've been doing this, a lot. You learn something new. So that worked, okay, guys? If you don't have a back stitch and you're not able to put a knot, then that's the way to do it, okay? So now I'm going to carry on sewing, and all I'm doing, as I've said, we've chatted a little while, I'm lining up my needle and my triangle. Maybe it's just the needle for you, maybe it's the fabric against here, but I am actually following all the way down, okay? I am sewing on that line. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. You keep going slowly when you're sewing it, okay? So I'm speeding it up. I've just remembered about my voice, so I hope everybody can hear me. Again, pop in the comments if you are having trouble, and I will try to be louder. We do have microphones on order, we have stands on order, but with the way of the world at the moment, as everybody knows, when you're trying to order things, they don't come when you want them to, okay? So I'm sewing all the way down to the end. Morning, Dawn. Don't often see that name. Welcome. And I'm going to stop just before the bottom. And I'm going to, yes, so I'm just doing this as I go along. I'm going as far as I can, okay? Needle up, foot up, pull out. Okay, now as I've said this on so many of my classes, if you have a needle, a thread cutter, use it, because that shows you, that is how much cotton you need to use so that this much stops it going back into the machine. What some people do is they pull this out, and I see this with professionals all the time. They snip here really quickly, and what happens is that thread then goes back in and you've got to rethread your machine again. So you can learn by looking at this one, because that is how much I need to leave, okay? So the other thing I showed somebody is take your thread across, okay? So if we measure, that's how much it's telling me I need to leave, okay? If you go down, that thread is just about disappearing over the side of my machine, okay? So that is where I'm going to cut. So I'm trying to make sure I'm covering everybody here, because if you don't have the tools that I have, I want you to be able to still do this. So we now have a thread at the end. Now I didn't backstitch, so this thread could now come undone. So we're going to do the same thing again. Now I'm going to do it close up, so hopefully you can see. There we go, I'll keep it as steady as I can. Now I'm just popping my pin into that stitch that was there, okay? And then as you can see, there's a tiny, tiny loop there. Try and get it to focus. So I'm now going to pop my needle into that loop that's at the bottom, not the top loop, and I'm going to pull, okay? So I now have both of my threads at the top. Now I'm going to try and knot this on camera. Hopefully you all know how to do a knot. but it might not work. I might have to move out of camera, okay? So what I would do, now this is enough thread for me to make a knot, but if you have dexterity issues, then maybe it isn't. Maybe you need to learn to just leave a little bit of a longer thread, okay? So that is now, that seam has a knot at the top and a knot at the bottom, and that is not going to come undone, okay? So I'm going to snip off my thread. Where's my thread going, everybody? It's going into my thread catcher so it doesn't go on the floor. So that is now sewn and it isn't going to move, okay? And you can see, where did I draw my line? You can see that I've sewn straight down the line that I drew, okay? So when I open this up, if I keep opening it, I'm not going to have a straight seam, so don't keep opening it up to check. But you'll see, even though I've used a black thread, I mean, you can see, if I really pull it, you can see those stitches. But hopefully, once you've ironed that, you know, you're not going to be able to see those stitches. And if you used a corresponding colour, which I haven't done today for obvious reasons, okay? Now, something else that we've learnt as we've been sewing, everybody, is your bobbin thread, that's my bobbin thread, and my top thread is not the same. Even if you get it as evenly as you can, it is not the same, okay? Oh, morning, Tiffany. Oh, so it's 5:36 where Tiffany is in the morning. Welcome, Tiffany. Lovely to have you join us. Right, I'm just going to pop that down a little bit so you can see. So I've used a grey sheet today because, as I said, I do read all of your comments. I take on board everything that you say, and people have said that they weren't able to see the white on white. So now we've got grey on white, okay? So hopefully you can see both. So this is my bobbin, my top thread, okay? And this is my bobbin thread. So if I then turn this over, because I want my straight line down that way, you can see the way my bees are going, I am now going to have bobbin thread here, okay, top thread here and bobbin thread on that side, and that's not what we want them to match, okay. Hurricane just passed. Wow, I hope you and everyone is safe, Tiffany. Gosh, we don't have those here, so yes, that's not a great way to start your day, is it? But like I said, I hope you're all safe. It's lovely to have you join us after that. Yes, gosh, I haven't looked at the news, so yeah, I think I'm having a luckier morning than you. So yeah, so this is my top thread, okay, and I want my top thread on this seam too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my fabric around, okay. So this is my top thread on that side. You can see we started here and we sewed all the way down, but now I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to sew all the way up, okay. So I'm going to place my fabric in. Now you notice I haven't done the bottom yet, okay, so I'm doing both of the sides. So we're going to do the same as we did before, but this time I'm going to use my back stitch. This is for people that have an electronic machine. So I'm starting, I've got my fabric sticking out the end of my foot, needle down, and then I'm going to pull my threads and then I'm going to back stitch. Again, my needle is lined up perfectly. Stop. I'm stopping about 2 stitches from the end, and then what that does, it gives you, now what you can do, if you can see this, I'm going to pull my thread. Can you see that? So I've just pulled my thread just with another pin. So this is my top thread here, okay? Now if I start sewing over that, that could give me a wobbly line. So I'm going to take that thread off, okay? So I'm just nipping it off, putting it in my thread catcher, and now I'm going to sew straight down. But I'm sewing over the top of those stitches. Now I don't know why, I said the other day, I don't know if it gives it more rigidity, but this now, because I've done those few stitches, A, it's knotted it, but B, my fabric is not going to disappear into my machine, okay? So now I'm going to sew forwards. And I'm keeping that lined up. I'm going to raise my voice because I know I'm using the machine now, so it makes it a little harder to hear. As I said in the comments, so this is part 1. So we are looking at box corners, which we've just been cutting, and we are looking at sewing that very, very first stitch that you've ever sewn on your machine. It's a long time ago for me. I remember the first thing I made. I mean, I started sewing at school, so I don't actually remember anything that I made at school. But the first thing I made was for my friend Karen, and I was so embarrassed that I never ever gave it to her, and I still have it. So apologies, Karen, if ever you watch this. So I'm going to go all the way up to the top, So I did, my first thing I made was a tote bag. I've backstitched again, okay? Needle up, and again, pull this out, okay? Now, I don't need to worry about tying it up, so I'm going to nip it off here, but I have all that thread, look. And you may feel that's a waste. Yes, it could be, but you're going to be popping that into your thread catcher, okay? Then it's going to go into landfill, and then all those magical things are going to happen to it. What you can do is you can keep all your threads and you can sew over them to make it have a beautiful effect. Google that if you, I don't know what it's called, I'll pop a link, but you can do that if you didn't want to waste all your threads. But that hasn't disappeared in my machine, and that is worth the money as far as I'm concerned for how much thread that I've just used, rather than having to keep rethreading everything. Now I'm just going to take, so I cut that first one, if you remember, when we sewed down, so I still have my back thread. And as I've said, take your threads off as you go. It makes life so much easier. Now, we have sewn both of our seams, so they both have top stitching on this side and bobbin stitch on the other. And now we're going to sew across the bottom, okay? And we're going to again using the top stitch, using the same method as I did before. I'm going to use my back stitch, okay? So I'm lining up my needle, going a little bit further down, back stitch. Now I've done it so many times that as this person, stop, I didn't cut my thread. As this person said, you know, she's seen lots of videos of people saying, right, we're going to do this, you've threaded your machine and now we're going to sew. And she said, but what does that mean? What does that mean, sew? Where am I going? What am I doing? Where am I positioning it? And I am guilty, the same as the other people that make videos on YouTube or Facebook. I'm guilty of the same thing, so I apologise. This is hopefully going to clear that up for everybody, because I just do it by all, you know, it's the same as when you learn to drive or anything that you do that you've done a million times before, is you just don't think about it. So I do apologise for all the new people that have just started out and I have gone too fast, okay? I know some others, you know, you're on your 4th, your 5th, your 20th project, and this is a bit basic for you, but I'm hoping that I can cover everything for everybody. So my thread cutter is there, and that's just taken off enough, okay? And then that's the bit that I've left. So we are now going to put our sewing machine on top of our scissors. Let's not do that. So I'm going to lay this down. I think I need to go back a little bit so you can see all of it. Again, apologies for the fiddliness. No, up. There we go. Now we can, no we can't. So these are all the little hiccups that people have been commenting on, okay? We are just starting out. We are figuring out how to do these lives, how to do these videos, how to get the sound quality, how to do all these things to make your experience with Wink Smile Sew, oh, the Torns Tailor Made, as lovely as possible. So because I didn't cut my back thread, look, can you see? I've now made myself a knot. So I'm going to try and find that knot. There's the bottom of my thread. There you go, I've pulled it smooth. And now I'm going to take those 2 threads off. Now, you might think that that won't make a difference on a tote bag, but you just need to get into these good practices, okay, guys? So, oh, that's another thing. Somebody didn't like me saying guys. I don't want to say ladies, I don't want to say gents. Should I just not say, and then it won't matter? So, boxing our corners, okay? We are going to separate our 2 pieces of fabric where we've sewn across that cross, and we're going to pull. And what happens is that joins in a triangle, okay? I will do the same on the other side and I will show you what we're doing, okay? So, we are matching up these seams, okay, as perfectly as we can, because that is the bit that's going to be showing. But also you need to make sure that your seam is matching down here, because if this is matching here, but you're going to sew your seam allowance ½ inch, we'll say, down here, if these seams aren't touching, that is where your cross is going to be. That's the bit you need to make perfect, okay? So by having these front seams match, that will help, okay? So put your hand inside the top of your bag and sort of just wiggle everything so everything is smooth and as flat as it can be. It's not going to be perfectly smooth, okay? So, and it's a bit too far for me to see, so I'm making sure that that's, but can you see now, those seams weren't lined up, okay? So I'm going to line them up further down, okay? So those seams there are perfectly matched. So if I'm going to sew across there, these bits are touching, okay? So that seam is perfect now. Putting that piece of fabric down, and then I'm going to pin. Push my thing into the fabric and then push down. Now if that's moved a tiny bit, hopefully that is a margin of error that you're happy with, okay? But that feels to me like it's the same. So as I said, on my amazing ruler, this is 1/2 inch, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that at the edge of my fabric. So I now know, as I've said, these rulers have so many uses. They really are good. So you can buy smaller ones. You can buy, I stood there for a long time and I wanted the rotary cutter, so that's why I bought them both together. But you can buy a cheaper ruler than this, and it's a square ruler. But obviously you do have all these other measurements around it in a square. So what you could do, if you had your square ruler, I think they're maybe 10 inches. But you could then use that for corners, okay? So you could pop this into the corner of your fabric, as you can imagine. Can't quite do it with this, but that would be the corner of your fabric. So then you could come back and it would have those measurements on it, okay? So maybe you could invest in one of those instead of these ones. But I really do highly recommend you buying one because it has made a difference to my sewing and making everything accurate. I'm going to measure the other side, okay? It does make it a little fiddlier for sewing because obviously you've then got smaller pieces, so I want to show you again. But obviously this video is going to stay up and you can re-watch as many times as you want to, either on YouTube or on Facebook, okay? So we're just pulling that open, popping our corners together, okay? I can hear the dog tapping away outside. So we're lining that back up, okay? But as I said, we don't know if that's now lined up further down. So I apologise when I made the, again, I've done it so many times. When I made the thread catcher video, I didn't go through this clearly enough. I was forgetting that people might not know. So can you see there? Now it's not lined up. So I'm going to move it over. Okay. I'm going to push it back down. And that should be perfect. I'm going to lift it up, pop my needle in, and hopefully it hasn't wriggled about too much. Okay, so again, take my ruler, place the fabric on where that black line is. Oh, move that down. Where that black line is. And then I'm going to draw. Now, if anybody remakes their thread catcher or starts off a tote bag, as I said, I've done the measurements for this. I just wanted it big enough and small enough for you A to see and B to fit within the camera angle, okay? So this probably isn't going to be, I think it's going to be big enough to carry a wine bottle or a large Bailey's bottle maybe. Maybe that's not a bad thing. But like I said, I can give this away to somebody and I'm sure that they will appreciate it. But if anybody does start their tote bag, please put any pictures up on the sewing group or the just the normal page, because we would love to see what you do. Okay, or you can send a picture to me and then I can post it if you want to. So I'm going to bring the machine back in and we're going to have to wiggle our phone again. There we go. I'm keeping an eye on the time. We've got 10 minutes to keep this under an hour, okay? When doing this, do you put the side seam allowance the same way or one left and one right? I don't know what you mean, Carol. So the side seam, so this is the side seam here. Is that what you mean? Can I make this with my serger? Yes, Tiffany, you so what you would do is you would make sure when you were sewing, apologies Carol, if you can re-ask that question, because I'm not sure that I've understood what you've asked, but I'm just going to answer Tiffany if you can ask again. So yes, so what you would do is you would line up your needle and what your serger would do. Is that the one that, is that an overlocker that cuts it off, or is that a serger? So yeah, so you would just line it up the same, and then it would take off your it would take off the outside of your fabric, and it would mean that you wouldn't have to do anything with your seams, which we might have to do tomorrow. We'd need to neaten up our seams, or we'd have to use an overlocker stitch. I was hoping I'd have time to show you guys how to use that today, but as I said, I want to keep this under an hour, so we might not be able to. But Carol, please ask your question again, or if you want to ask me in the messenger, and I'll try and we can have a little video chat and I can try and answer it for you. Okay, so I'm lining up my needle again with the line that I drew. Okay, needle down, back stitch, and I'm just sewing over where we have just drawn. Now I'm not cutting my threads because, as I've said, I want to try and keep this under an hour because it does make it much easier for me to post it and for me to send it to people. Okay, so it struggled a little bit over those 2 pieces of fabric. Well, actually there's 4 pieces of fabric there now because we've got the seam. So back stitch at the end, okay, and then take off my threads and do it as I'm going along. So it's up to you whether you want your bobbin thread or your top. But on the top I can see side seams to the left, to the backs, do the same. My side seams are all the same. So I've got 1/2 inch on the top, on the side, and I've got 1/2 inch on that side, Carol. And then when I made my cut, so you can see there is the 1/2 inch there. So what you would do is when you made your square, so we cut this bit out. Where have I put it? I don't know where I put my corners. When I cut this bit out, we measured so that we would know how big this would be. So now this seam is going to be the same. So I've got 1/2 inch seam here and a 1/2 inch seam there. Now if you wanted to, you could open this out. I'll do that actually, hoping that it's not going to move. I'm going to open this out, make it flat, and then put my needle back in, okay? And then we can sew straight across, okay? So now we've now got 1/2 inch seam on that side. I hope that's answered your question, Carol. If it hasn't, again, please ask again. I want to make sure that everybody can sew the things that we add to the group here. This video will stay up, Carol, so if you wanted to go, once it's posted, if you wanted to go back and watch it, and then maybe your question will be answered there from the beginning, hopefully. But as I said, I haven't really thought about the measurements of this bag. I just wanted to get something on here that would fit in the screen so that you would be able to see what I was trying to show you with the corners, okay? If you would like a tote bag tutorial, there are classes available to make a complete tote bag with box corners and with some different variations of handles. So great, thanks. Oh, I'm glad that helped, Carol. So there is the bottom of your bag. Now, can you see, when we sewed the Gracie tote, when we made other bags, you should have your seams matching. But obviously what I did is I separated this one, okay, but I didn't concentrate on here. So what you should do, so that now that's going to sit on the bottom of your bag, these should both be the same, okay? So you should have them facing one way or the other way. But if we opened them up, like we opened this one, then we wouldn't have that problem. Right, shall we turn it? Shall we see? Gosh, I hope this works. Is Renee still watching? What do you think, Renee? Shall we see? There you go. Okay. Can you see now? Pretty straight. Okay. But that's because we took all those precautions. Let's open up the other side. Slightly off, that one. Just slightly. But that's the one that I opened the seam out on, is it? Yes. So I think it must have wriggled. So what you would do when you lined them up, you would open your seam and you would make sure, but that's pretty straight, okay? So that is the bottom of our teeny tiny tote bag. What I might do is take some of that off and then turn it into a small square tote bag. I mean, this isn't lined or anything. Like I said, I wasn't really making a bag to use, I wanted to show everybody how to make the corners. So this bag, now what you could do, I guess, they are of a similar size, so you could sew your corners and then turn it into this smaller bag, okay? But we'll stick with this size. We will make the straps tomorrow. And like I said, we're going to make some different versions of the straps, but hopefully I have shown you how, put my hand back in, to perfect your corners, okay? Not bad. But as I said, all those little tricks, all those tips that I showed you, what would you use to give the bottom a flat surface, please, Dawn? If I was making a tote bag, this is quite thin. This is a duvet cover. I've said that before, so it's quite thin. So I would line this. I wouldn't just have it as a thin bag, because if you take this to the shop, you're not going to get much. It's not going to carry much in there. I mean, it's going to feel quite flimsy. But you want, this one is made from a canvas. It's got a second lining in that's really thick. But what you can do is you can sew something, so you can see how big this is. You've got those measurements there, okay? So you can sew something. We could use the straps actually as the way to make a pattern, but you would sew a square. So this is a rectangle, okay? You would sew a piece of fabric that fitted these measurements perfectly, okay? And you would leave an opening. You slide, so you can see there's a gap here. Okay, this is hollow. Just imagine this is the same size as your tote bag, okay? You'd slide a piece of card in there that's slightly smaller, and then you would fold the ends over. You would sew across it. Sorry, somebody just banged downstairs. You would sew a seam across it, okay? And then you would slide that into the bottom of your bag. And if you were doing it, sorry if people don't like the stuffing, I know my husband hates it. Inside this tote bag, you can see where my lining is, okay? So if you kept the hole in that, I'm trying to think if I've got another bag I can show you tomorrow. You would keep this open, okay? You would sew that piece, as I said, you'd put that into the bottom of your bag, okay? Push it round to the bottom, and then you would then sew that up and connect it, okay? And then you would have that in the bottom of your bag. But if you wanted to wash your bag, you would then have to take that out. But if you were sewing the bottom, I can do that on one of the classes, Deb, or maybe once if you were sewing this up, if you used a longer stitch, like a top stitch, if you then wanted to pull this open, take your stitches out, unpick it, then you could take that bottom base out, then you could wash this. Morning, Josephine. You could wash this and then iron it and then put the base back in. But quite often we don't wash these. But this bag is, oh, Catherine, when did I sew it? 6 years old, maybe? I didn't sew it in the end. It went to lots of craft fairs with me. I ended up using it as my bag, and it is quite yucky. So this could probably do with a wash now after 6 years, and I've not much use. Quite a lot of use rather, so it does take a long time to get your bags dirty. But yes, that's how you could make a base for your bag. So I hope I have helped. Please share. No, you're very, that's okay, Deb. Please share your tote bags if you start to make one. Please share your thread catchers if you make one of those. And we will see you back tomorrow to sew our straps. Thanks for watching. Bye.